Welcome to our deep dive, everyone. Get ready to explore the fascinating world of how plants eat, something we humans can only dream of.
It really is remarkable, isn't it?
We're going to uncover those hidden food factories within plants.
Oh, yes. And don't forget about the plant that acts like a vampire, stealing nutrients from others.
We'll even discover how plants help put protein on your plate.
It's all thanks to their amazing ability to self-feed, unlike us who have to search for our food.
That's what makes plants so special, right? That's what makes them the bedrock of most life on Earth.
Absolutely. They're the primary producers. Think of them as the chefs of the planet. They whip up food from scratch using just sunlight, water, and air.
So these plant chefs are the reason we have things like juicy burgers and fresh salads.
Exactly. They form the base of the food chain, providing energy for everything else. So yeah, every burger, every salad ultimately owes its existence to plants.
It's mind-blowing when you think about it that way.
It really is. Think about how many foods you enjoy that rely on plants either directly or indirectly.
It highlights how crucial they are, their role in the circle of life.
Without a doubt.
Okay, so let's break down this incredible self-feeding process. Time to talk about photosynthesis, the plant's powerhouse.
Photosynthesis. Imagine leaves as bustling food factories.
Busy little factories, huh?
And the star of the show is chlorophyll, that green pigment we all recognize in plants. It acts like the plant's very own solar panel, capturing light energy from the sun.
So plants are basically running on sunshine.
You could say that. They take that captured sunlight and use it to combine carbon dioxide from the air with water absorbed through their roots.
It sounds like a complicated process.
It's a complex chemical reaction, yes, but the end result is carbohydrates, the plant's primary energy source.
So those carbs are like plant sugars and starches, right? Just like what gives us energy.
Precisely. And here's a fun fact. When they create those carbohydrates, plants release oxygen as a byproduct.
You mean the air we breathe?
That's right. The very air we breathe is a result of plants doing their thing, photosynthesizing.
It really puts into perspective how much we depend on plants.
It's a beautiful symbiotic relationship.
Speaking of plants doing their thing, you know what I've always wondered? If leaves are the main food factories, what about plants with red or purple leaves?
Great observation.
Do they photosynthesize too?
Yes, they do. Even those colorful leaves contain chlorophyll. It's just masked by other pigments.
So are those colorful pigments just for looks, or do they serve another purpose for the plant?
Well, some pigments protect the plant from too much sunlight or even deter insects. So while they may appear decorative, they often have an important role in the plant's survival.
Nature is so clever. But let's get back to the food part. We talked about carbohydrates, but what about other things plants need, like proteins?
Excellent point. Plants need a variety of nutrients, just like we do. They need things like proteins to grow and function properly. And for proteins, they need nitrogen.
Can't they just pull nitrogen from the air like they do with carbon dioxide?
I wish it were that simple. Nitrogen in the air is in a form that plants can't use directly.
So how do they get it?
This is where things get really interesting. They get help from bacteria.
Bacteria? You mean like the ones we try to avoid?
Well, some bacteria are harmful, but many are essential for life. Certain bacteria can convert atmospheric nitrogen into a form that plants can absorb.
So these bacteria are the key to unlocking nitrogen for plants. It sounds like a microscopic partnership.
Exactly. Some of these nitrogen-fixing bacteria live right inside the roots of plants, like peas and beans.
So it's a mutually beneficial relationship then.
It's called symbiosis. The bacteria give the plant usable nitrogen, and the plant provides the bacteria a safe home and food.
It's amazing, the teamwork in nature. But before we move on, could you quickly clarify exactly what nitrogen fixation is?
Of course. Nitrogen fixation is simply the process where those bacteria convert atmospheric nitrogen gas into ammonia, a form of nitrogen that plants can actually use.
So thanks to these bacteria, plants can build proteins, and ultimately that's how we get protein from plants, right?
You got it. But here's the thing. Not all plants follow these rules.
Wait, what do you mean?
There are some rebels in the plant world that don't rely on photosynthesis or those nitrogen-fixing bacteria.
You're telling me there are plants that don't make their own food?
You heard right. These plants are called heterotrophs, meaning they get their food from other organisms.
They're like plant parasites. Is this where the plant vampire comes in?
You guessed it.
Yeah.
The daughter plant, or Cuscuta, is a perfect example. It lacks chlorophyll, so no photosynthesis for this one.
No photosynthesis, so how does it survive?
It attaches itself to other plants and sucks the nutrients right out of them.
Okay, that's a bit creepy, but fascinating at the same time.
Mm.
So daughter is like a true vampire, totally dependent on its host.
Exactly. And there are other types of heterotrophic plants too. Some, like the pitcher plant, have chlorophyll and can photosynthesize.
So they're not full-on vampires.
Not quite. They supplement their diet by trapping and digesting insects.
Wow. So they're like part-time carnivores.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty wild. It makes you wonder, does that blur the lines between plants and animals? What do you think?
It's a thought-provoking question. These examples definitely challenge our ideas of what it means to be a plant or an animal. They show us the complexity and interconnectedness of nature.
That's a great point. We focused on how plants get their nutrients, but now I'm curious about something else. We talk about the soil as this source of nutrients, but how do those nutrients get replenished? It's not an endless supply, right?
You're right, it's not. And that brings us to the world of nutrient cycles. But before we dive into that, let's take a quick break.
Sounds good to me. Back in a flash, folks.
Welcome back. We were about to unravel the mystery of those nutrient cycles, remember?
Oh, right. Nutrient cycles. They sound pretty important. Like nature's way of making sure things keep running smoothly.
You got it. Think of it as this massive interconnected loop. Nutrients flow from the soil to the plants, then to the animals that eat those plants, and then eventually back to the soil again.
A giant natural recycling system. That's pretty cool.
Exactly. Just like when we recycle, it's all about reducing waste and making sure resources are used efficiently.
Speaking of recycling, isn't composting a good example of this in action?
Perfect example. All those food scraps we might normally toss out are actually full of nutrients. Composting breaks them down and releases those nutrients right back into the soil.
So composting my banana peels and coffee grounds actually helps feed new plant life.
You got it. It's a powerful reminder that what we see as waste can actually be super valuable.
Okay, so besides composting, who are the big players in these nutrient cycles?
Well, we touched on decomposers earlier, remember?
The bacteria and fungi.
Those are the ones. Nature's master recyclers. They break down dead plants and animals, releasing those trapped nutrients back into the soil.
It's kind of strange to think that death and decay are so important for life to continue.
It's like a constant cycle of renewal. It really highlights how interconnected all living things are. We rely on these processes, and they rely on us to play our part.
What happens if something throws those cycles off balance?
That's a really important question. Sadly, we're seeing that happen more and more because of human activities.
Like what kinds of things?
Deforestation is a big one. When huge areas of trees are chopped down, that disrupts the natural flow of nutrients back into the soil.
Makes sense. Trees are like giant nutrient pumps, right?
Exactly. And intensive agriculture can also deplete the soil if it's not managed carefully.
So we really need to be more aware of how we're impacting these natural systems.
We do. We need to think less about a make-waste kind of model, more about a circular approach, like nature uses.
So what can we do besides composting? How can we support these nutrient cycles?
Lots of things. Supporting sustainable agriculture is a big one. Look for food that's grown in ways that prioritize soil health.
So like organic farming and stuff like that.
Exactly. And reducing food waste is crucial too. Every little bit we throw away means lost nutrients that could have gone back into the system.
I never thought about it that way.
Even simple things like planting trees can make a difference.
Trees are like superheroes. Before we move on, can you do a quick recap on how those cycles can get messed up?
Sure. We talked about deforestation. Intensive agriculture can also deplete nutrients if things like crop rotation and cover cropping aren't used.
Right.
Pollution can contaminate the soil and water, which throws things off. And then there's climate change, which is a whole other layer of complexity. Changing weather patterns can impact everything from decomposition rates to how well plants grow.
It sounds like we need to pay attention to all these different factors.
Exactly. It's about seeing the big picture.
Okay, so we've talked about how plants get nutrients and how those nutrients are recycled. But I'm curious about the nutrients themselves. I know we mentioned nitrogen for proteins, but what are some of the other things plants need to thrive?
Well, just like us, they need a balanced diet. Plants need all sorts of minerals that they get from the soil through their roots.
So it's not just sunshine, water, and air. There's a whole plant menu we need to think about.
You got it. Think of it like a recipe. You need the right ingredients to make a good dish.
Okay, so what's on the plant menu?
They need things like phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, and calcium, just to name a few.
Wow, sounds like they need to get the grocery store. But why are those minerals so important? What do they actually do for the plant?
Each one has a special role. Phosphorus is really important for strong roots and transferring energy. Potassium helps regulate water balance and makes the plant strong overall.
Handy for those hot summer days.
Exactly. Magnesium is a key player in making chlorophyll, which we know is essential for photosynthesis.
Right, and calcium.
That helps give the plant structure and keeps it healthy and strong.
Wow. Each nutrient has its own job. It's like a well-coordinated team.
Yeah.
What happens if a plant doesn't get enough of a particular nutrient? Does it just give up?
Plants are tough. They can adapt to tough situations, but if they don't get enough of a certain nutrient, you'll start to see signs of trouble.
Like what kinds of signs?
Well, it depends on the missing nutrient. If a plant is short on nitrogen, for example, its older leaves might start to turn yellow. That's because the plant is trying to send whatever nitrogen it does have to the new growth.
So it's like the plant is sacrificing the older leaves to protect the new ones.
You could say that. It's a way to survive. You might also see other signs, depending on what's missing.
Like what?
Things like stunted growth, brown spots, wilting, or even fruits and veggies that are weird shapes.
So if you know what to look for, you can play plant detective.
Exactly. By looking at the symptoms, you can figure out which nutrient is lacking and fix the problem. Before we move on, would you like me to define what a nutrient deficiency is?
Sure.
A nutrient deficiency in plants just means they don't have enough of a specific nutrient to grow and be healthy. It can cause all those symptoms we talked about and affect how well the plant grows and produces.
Makes sense. Okay, last question for now. How do those minerals actually get from the soil into the plant? It's not like they have tiny mouths.
That's where root hairs come in.
Root hairs. I've heard of those.
Remember those teeny tiny extensions that grow out from the main roots?
Aren't they super fragile?
They are, but they make up for it in numbers. They increase the root surface area so the plant can reach more of the soil and get to more nutrients.
So each root hair is like a tiny explorer searching for those precious minerals.
I love that. And they're really good at their jobs. They use a few different tricks, like diffusion and active transport.
So it's not just a passive process. The plants actually put effort into pulling in those nutrients.
Exactly. Active transport requires energy, but it allows plants to get minerals even when there's not a lot in the soil.
They're not just sitting there waiting for food to come to them.
Not at all. They're actively seeking out what they need.
Speaking of food, I'm seeing how all this plant nutrition stuff ties back to what we eat. We need protein, and plants need nitrogen to build protein. But how do those plant proteins actually become the proteins that fuel us?
That's a great question, and it's a big reason why plant nutrition is so important for our health. When we eat plants, we're taking in the nutrients they've taken from the soil. We're part of that interconnected web.
So it's not just about getting calories, we're getting building blocks thanks to plants.
Exactly. They're doing the hard work of making proteins, carbs, vitamins, and minerals, and we get to benefit from all that.
It really makes you think about how connected everything is.
It does. That's why healthy soil is so important. If the soil isn't healthy, the plants aren't healthy, and that affects us too.
It's not just about eating enough, it's about eating the right things, getting those nutrients we need to be at our best.
Exactly. That's why understanding plant nutrition is so important. It helps appreciate the crucial role plants play in keeping us healthy.
I'm definitely feeling a lot more knowledgeable about plants and a lot more grateful for all the work they do to keep us fed.
It's been my pleasure sharing this with you. There's still so much more to explore, but I hope this has given you a new appreciation for the incredible world of plants.
It definitely has. I can't wait to learn more. Welcome back, everyone. I feel like we've just scratched the surface of the incredible world of plant nutrition. There's so much to learn.
You're right about that. We could talk about plants all day.
We've explored how plants use sunshine to make food, how they get those essential nutrients, and how those nutrients are recycled back into the ecosystem.
We even met some plant rebels along the way, remember?
The heterotrophs, the plant vampires, and the part-time carnivores.
They really show us how diverse and fascinating the plant world is.
They do.
Yeah.
But now I'm thinking about something you mentioned earlier, the impact of human activities on these delicate natural systems. It seems like we have a responsibility to protect those nutrient cycles we've been talking about.
Absolutely. We can't just take it for granted that these cycles will keep working perfectly on their own. Our actions can have big consequences.
So what are some of the things that threaten those nutrient cycles?
Well, deforestation is a huge problem. When we clear vast areas of trees, it disrupts the natural flow of nutrients back into the soil.
That makes sense. Trees are like giant nutrient recyclers, aren't they?
They are. And intensive agriculture can also deplete the soil if we're not careful about how we manage it.
So what can we do to make sure that agriculture is more sustainable and that those nutrient cycles stay healthy?
There are a lot of great solutions out there. Things like crop rotation can really make a difference. By switching up the crops that are planted in a field, we can help replenish the soil and prevent those nutrients from getting used up too quickly.
So it's like giving the soil a break.
Exactly. And there's also cover cropping.
I've heard of that.
That's where farmers plant things like clover or ryegrass between harvests, and those plants actually help protect and improve the soil.
So it's like giving the soil a cozy blanket.
That's a great way to put it. And we can also reduce our reliance on chemical fertilizers, which can disrupt the natural balance of things.
So using more natural alternatives like compost or manure.
Exactly. Those are great options that can help keep those nutrient cycles running smoothly.
What about pollution? We haven't really talked about that yet. How does pollution affect those nutrient cycles?
Well, pollution can introduce all sorts of harmful things into the soil and water, and that messes up those delicate balances. Things like industrial waste, runoff from farms, and even air pollution can contaminate ecosystems.
So those pollutants can harm the good guys, like the decomposers.
That's right. They can disrupt the whole system.
Sounds like we need to be much more careful about how we deal with our waste and try to reduce pollution as much as possible.
We definitely do. It's about moving away from that take, make, waste mindset. We need to start thinking more about how we can regenerate and sustain our planet.
That makes sense. So what are some things that we can do in our everyday lives to help support those nutrient cycles? Besides composting, which we already talked about.
Lots of things. Supporting local farmers who use sustainable practices is a great way to start. We can also try to reduce our food waste, eat what we buy and compost those scraps.
Yeah.
And we can also be mindful of the products we choose, opting for eco-friendly options that minimize pollution.
What about planting trees? That seems like a pretty simple but powerful thing to do.
Absolutely. Trees are amazing at helping to restore those nutrient cycles. Plus, they give us clean air and a beautiful environment to enjoy.
It's incredible to think that something as simple as planting a tree can have such a big impact.
It really can.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening for me. It's really made me appreciate the power of plants and the importance of protecting our planet's resources.
I'm so glad to hear that. It's been a pleasure sharing my passion for plants with you. I hope you'll continue to explore and learn about the fascinating world around us.
I definitely will. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of plant power. Keep that curiosity growing, everyone.